I'm Brenda. Welcome to my quilt room. Today, I'd like to just be very informal and show you a project that I've been working on. A few years ago, a lady at our church had passed away, and some of the family asked me if I would consider making quilts out of her clothes. And so, number one, if you're a sewer or a quilter and someone asks you to do something like that for them, certainly don't feel obligated. But it is quite an honor that they would think enough of you to ask you to do something like that for them. So this is the first quilt that I'm working on of those that I'm going to make. And this is one of her dresses. She was a tall lady. And you may be thinking, I'm not sure that I know how to deconstruct a piece of clothing and whether or not I could actually do a project like that. Well, I'm going to try to give you a few tips to walk you through how to do a project like that. Number one, you want to make sure that the piece of clothing that you're going to work with is washable. And all of her dresses and pieces of clothes that I took are washable, and I have laundered them and they're all clean. Start small in deconstructing the clothing. I started with sleeves, the sleeve off of another dress, and most likely they're not going to be cotton. They'll probably be a polyester blend, and the fabric will have to be stabilized. So I like to use this very lightweight, it's a Pellon fusible interfacing. In fact, and you can see it is so light that even when you iron it on, you can very easily go back and unpeel it if you need to straighten it or anything like that. The lady wanted a cactus pattern, and so what I did was I went on the internet and I found some coloring book pages that had some cactus plants. And so what I did was I copied them out like on copy paper and put them on these file folders. I have a lot of these, so I use these, and I cut little cactuses out that I could use to make various shapes within the vases of the project. So I've cut off a sleeve, and I have ironed this fusible web to it. What I have discovered recently is that due to so many people making masks, that I'm actually unable to find any of this because people are using it as interfacing it as a third layer in their mask making. So I've ordered another product that I found online, and it is an interfacing. It's somewhat heavier than this, and so I'm hoping that that will come out and work pretty good. I've ironed a few pieces on here of a scrap to just try it. You can see it's still very flexible. For the project that I'm working on, where I'm simply stitching around the pieces to applique them on, this should be no problem to work with. And it did go on nicely. It will peel off if you need to peel it back off. It will peel off. It's just not as easy to peel off as the very light featherweight interfacing. So I took my stencil and just draw around it with the friction pen. And I think I might have showed you this before when we were talking about applique. I've done another video about how to do applique, and you may want to go and look at that and watch that video. So I would simply draw this on, and then I will cut out my cactus out of that sleeve. And then when I have it, I cut up several pieces. She had a blouse, and it had a lot of flowers on it. And if you can look behind me and see, there's some little red, pinkish blossoms, some purple ones, and there were blue ones. And after I stabilized the fabric, I went back with a smaller pair of craft scissors and cut these out because I knew I wanted to put them on into the project. And so once you have your piece cut out, and I knew what background she wanted, I'm going to take one of these. She wanted a gray background. And so here we have, I've started on this one. And when you do your applique and your project and your fabric is stabilized, start with the piece that will be the farthest in the background of what you're sewing. And so on this one, it's going to be the green. And so I have stitched around the 3 cactus that make up this plant. And the next piece to be done is the vase, which is purple. And then the last 2 pieces will be, I will come back and pin these on and stitch around those. Now, typically, and I've never done this before, when I'm sewing, I simply take like my stitch which I've already done on this particular vase. I've rolled off some stitch which. And I've put a few pieces on here, and I've ironed it onto the block to hold it in place while I'm sewing. And then if I have any little edges sticking up, I will use this clear Elmer's glue and just simply put a dot of it, like on the edges. When you go to sew around the edges of these flowers, the tips can get a little bit tricky if they're not solidly on there, and I will put a little dot of this clear glue on there before I sew it down. And so the next piece that needs to be sewed on here is the vase. Now, to stabilize it while I'm stitching underneath, while I'm stitching on the sewing machine, I'm going to pin a piece of copy paper behind the vase. This just gives you extra stability while you're sewing a lot of stitches, like in a satin stitch on your sewing machine. Because several people have said that they wanted to see how do you applique them on. So I have cut out, I've stabilized the fabric, and I've cut out my applique piece, and I have now put the stitch which behind it, and it's glued down, and I've got the copy paper behind it, and now I'm going to go to the sewing machine and I'm going to stitch around the vase. Now, if you have a pair of these they may help you. They help me quite a bit. They're quite handy. They have these little nubs on them of rubber, so that when you put them on and your piece that you're working on is at the sewing machine, it really helps you maneuver and guide your fabric along as you watch where you're sewing. And so now we're going to go to the sewing machine, and I'm going to sew this for you. And I have my sewing machine set at a number 3. It's a zigzag. My stitch length is a 1.25 and my width is 3.5. So you want to start always on the outside edge. So if you have a needle down position on your machine, you want to be sure that it is in the needle down position. And then you'll start sewing, and you want to sew over enough that when you come back, you're at the edge of your applique. And then we will just, having the copy paper behind the applique helps so much. And then when you have to pivot, your needle is down and it's on the outside edge, and you'll just want to pivot and turn slightly and then start sewing again. And you can kind of maneuver it as you go. The gloves with the rubber tips help so much in moving and guiding your applique along. And then at the corner, I don't turn it a full like 90 degrees. You kind of want to work a few stitches at a time and turn it a little bit and then stitch a little, stop and pivot. It just goes so much smoother with the paper behind it. You don't have to use copy paper. That just happens to be what I had. They said you can use newspaper, which when I use newspaper, I don't like doing that because the ink tends to come off on your hands if your hands get warm at all. And I wouldn't want any of that ink to come off on my fabric. So I just stick with the copy paper. If you're a little too close to a pen, just pull your pins out as you go. And then when you're at the end, stitch over some of your stitches. And then we're gonna take it off. Clip our threads. And so this is another step. When you're at the front, at the top, and you've finished, you've got these tails. Now some people would probably just snip those threads off, and I'm not going to do that just because there's some things that I am just super fussy about, and this is one of those things. And I'm going to take these threads and put them in my embroidery needle here, and I'm going to pull them through to the back side. This is something we used to do years ago when we had home ec and you were doing embroidery. You always tied your threads off. So I'm going to tie those off, even though the likelihood that this would ever unravel is probably slim. But I just like to do that as an extra precaution anyway. Now I'm going to show you how easy it is to pull the paper off. Once you have stitched, the stitching is so close that the paper, it just comes right off of your applique. Now these large pieces, because I'm conservative and I don't like to just throw things away, I have lots of little pieces. As you can see on the quilt behind me, I have all these little cactuses and blossoms, and these pieces of paper can still be reused for those. And I'm going to pull this piece right out of the middle. And this keeps your, if you're using a very tight stitch, this will just keep your block from wanting to pucker up around like where you've sewed. If you've done any applique before, you may see a lot of puckering around there, but having the copy paper behind it keeps it so smooth. And so I'll just pin And I'll pin this little flower back on and hang this back up. And I will continue to look for the next one that uses purple, because I feel like doing it this way, you're not continually changing the thread in and out of your machine. Just go by layers. I will do like all my green. I'll look for what's the next color, and I'll do blue, and then I'll do purple, and then mainly a lot of these gold vases and the blossoms are at the end, and I'll do that last, and I'll do it in sections. This section of blocks are not completed yet, versus the ones behind me have all been completed. And I was partly doing that because at this point I'm not still yet sure how many blocks it's going to be. I thought at first I would do 30 blocks. Now I'm considering possibly it's going to be a large throw, 25, maybe 5 across and 5 down, with maybe a border around it. But anyway, the lady had a lot of really pretty dresses, and so I'm saving as much of pieces of the garment as I can. On this block here, when I was deconstructing one of the blouses, the label happened to fall out, and I thought, oh, that is really cute. So I put that on the vase. And on the dress here that's hanging up, there are really nice buttons on there. I will probably take the buttons off and save those and put them in something else. There's lots of pieces that can be saved and used in something. If I end up maybe not using the top piece of a garment, what I may end up doing is turning the top piece with the collar and the buttons still on it into a really nice pillow. So don't be afraid to try and deconstruct something for someone. If they trust you enough to cut the garment, maybe they want to be part of the process and do that process with you. So I have quite a few quilts that I'm going to be making, and I will be blending the fabric of the garment with cotton quilting fabric to come up with something special that they probably, it wouldn't be something you'll probably use every day. You may want to lay it at the foot of your bed as a remembrance, or as a throw over a rocking chair in your living room. But this is what I'm working on right now, and I just wanted you to see it. I'm pretty happy with how it's coming out. I think it's going to come together and be something really beautiful that that they'll treasure. So thank you for spending part of your day with me in my quilt room, and we'll see you next time. If you haven't subscribed or liked the channel, please do so. Thank you.